So I'm gonna turn to Jim Connaughton first and then Andy Karsner. Each of them will make a few framing remarks, and then what we'll try to do is get a little discussion among them and with the congressman, and then hopefully we'll have a little time also to engage you all as well. So Jim?
Great, thanks. Thanks, Lynn, and great to see everybody, and Gail in particular, good to see you again. And Congressman, it's a real pleasure to share the panel with you. So let me just kick it off. I've got a sort of very simple philosophy when it comes to energy and environment conservation and regulation. Markets before mandates. If you need mandates, have them be market-based. Very simple, sort of construct. And it really comes from having worked the private sector, having worked in government, having worked large institutions, having worked in technology. What's remarkable about America, and we heard it from the senator, we heard it from the congressman, we just have this relentless cultural push to innovate. And if you think about it, and you look back at the arc of the last 50, 60 years, we also want to protect the environment. We've got the most stringent environmental requirements, most stringent clean air requirements, most stringent clean water requirements, most stringent hazardous waste management and disposal requirements. So we impose upon ourselves some of the highest safety standards in the world. We impose ourselves these very stringent performance requirements, and yet we innovate, and yet we produce, and we are still the most globally competitive nation on earth. So actually, we found a way to have it all, okay? And so really, the conversation going forward is how to have it all better. That's really what this is about. It's how to innovate better, how to innovate faster, how to share that innovation more broadly, how to lower the cost of that innovation on the one side, and it's how to attain, sustain, and achieve greater levels of environmental protection and conservation. It's an and conversation. And the philosophy that I bring to this, really has to be start with the market. Start with the market because we know that's the fastest mover. The analogy I always use, how many of you were around in 2002? Okay, right? You're all around. How many of you had a computer with a massive lead-based CRT? Okay, where are the gnomes that came along in the 3 years that followed and disappeared all the CRTs and replaced them with flat panel monitors that are much more efficient, much higher performing, and that we gladly paid 3 times more to purchase? Okay, that didn't happen with government. Okay, there's incredible transformation globally. Cool new product, met a lot of needs and objectives. So my basic view is follow the money, follow the products, follow the interests, make it popular, and you get explosive adoption. The same thing occurs with cell phones. The magic of liberalizing the telecom market, right? Restricting regulation just to the wires and letting the rest of the system innovate. In 5 years, right? In 5 years, we went from our touch-tone princess phones, right, to the availability of the BlackBerry, the Android phone, and the iPhone. 5 years, globally. I mean, just hundreds of millions of users. Okay, that's what we need to be looking for, and that's what we need to unleash. So, as we look at energy, in terms of markets, we're in Washington, and I know we all focus on incentives. I know we all focus on regulations. I know we all focus on research and development, grants and all of that. But I got to tell you, on energy, okay, the big action and trillions of dollars are being spent outside of the government overview, okay? And so I say follow the money, okay? Power plants being built in, all throughout Asia. Africa finally beginning to get some energy and investment, to help begin to create an infrastructure that people find value in and maybe can actually help bring some peace to some of those nations as well, because the society has a common goal of growth. This is all happening in the private world, okay? And it's dwarfing the expenditures and the time and effort we spend talking on some of these issues in Washington. How do we channel that kind of broad energy in energy, which is, lifts people out of poverty? Okay, so and whether it's in technology, my company, we're C3 Energy, purely privately funded. We're not selling to the government. We're not buying from the government. We're trying to solve the issue of how to make the smart grid smart. Okay, it's a big data problem. Okay, and people in Silicon Valley like to tackle those problems. And yet, if we succeed, and we will, The technologists who put hardware, who can create more information, have a system that can process the information and drive 20 to 30% efficiency into our grid. That's not a cost to society, right? That's a several $100 billion a year of net economic advantage to our society. Okay, but that's through private sector innovation. The challenges I see in the energy space, whether it's in the electricity supply, gas supply, oil and gas, the challenge I see is we are not confident enough to remove some of the shackles that do not do anything to advance environmental protection or performance. Okay, so we've over-constrained. Okay, but we're now smart enough. 30 years after the last major piece of environmental legislation was created, right? We haven't reauthorized our major environmental laws. We haven't looked at them in over 25 years. We are operating under a regulatory dynamic that is older than my kids, right? My kids are kind of old now, and so. And my son Spencer's a really innovative guy, but if he was locked into a 1990s mindset, he wouldn't be doing all the cool things he's doing now. But that's where we are on environment policy, and that's where we are on energy policy. So my main thesis, and hopefully we'll get into some specifics, is let's be confident that the market dynamics that we understand can actually be deployed to create much more scalable outcomes. Let's be confident about that. Let me just make two other quick points. Incentives, okay? Everybody loves incentives. Once you've incentivized everything, you've incentivized nothing, okay? So we have incentives for wind, solar, coal, nuclear, oil, gas. We have incentives, and it adds up to more than $100 billion. Keeping with the congressman's point, with the senator's point, if I took the $100 billion and I gave $90 billion back to the Treasury, and really I'm giving it to my kids who aren't paying that much more in taxes when the bill comes due on the deficit, I can double the government R&D funding with the remaining $10 billion. Okay? Now, that's a simple proposition. And it's markets before mandates, and if mandates market-based, well, incentives the same side of the equation. Why are we even picking winners and losers? We want a certain we want a certain energy content and a certain emission profile. Have that be the metric, and focus on the technologies that are delivering the highest, best use. I don't care what the outcome is, but that's just a huge opportunity sitting right there that could be transformative and create scalable events. And then when it comes to regulation, I want to really underline what the senator said. We've tackled mercury, we've tackled sulfur dioxide, we've tackled nitrogen oxide. We're now going after the final piece of greenhouse gas emissions with this EPA regulation, okay? But the better, more durable approach is Congress stepping up to the plate, having a conversation, deciding whether to do it, how much to do it, how fast to do it, and at what cost. We know that when Congress gets together and does that, you get something like the acid rain trading program that has withstood the test of time as the single most successful, single most ambitious, and single lowest cost per environmental gain that has ever been produced because of the political consensus that grew from that. And I think as we look at greenhouse gases, I don't care where you are on the spectrum, this is the subject that requires a legislative response, requires legislative accountability, and will give us as a society durability and confidence to go forward. So I just want to make that pitch at the end too.
Great, thank you. Andy.
Well, I didn't know what to expect coming here. We've had a long time, a lot of iterations to pull this together this morning. And I am probably the most displaced ex-policymaker amongst all of us here because I don't spend a lot of time on the Hill. But it's a meaningful cause to me, and I've already gotten the takeaway, which is there is extraordinary leadership sitting here in the voice of the congressman, in Kelly Ayotte, of course, people I admire, the Secretary and Jim, and others that are saying we have what we would say in all the corporate boards I belong to, we have a series of differentiated solutions to high-value problems. And the question, I think, for us as conservatives, as many of us are conservatives and Republicans, is how do we begin to apply and lead on differentiated solutions to high-value problems? And I think that there's some blurriness. People, if there's any one little thing that I'd sort of begin to kind of crawl back on, said this morning is, well, how do, what are the nonpartisan things to agree on? And that's mainly problem ID. Sometimes the party, the conservative side of things, has a problem of saying we agree with the other guy that there's a problem, and therefore we're not going to talk about solutions. So I don't actually think we have to agree on solutions at all. In fact, I think most of the solutions tabled by the other side are poor solutions. They're bad solutions. They're solutions that don't serve society. They're solutions that are deleterious to the economy. They're solutions that are corrosive to the long-term objectives and aspirations of doing good things for conservation, for the environment, for our environmental well-being. But we can't apply our solutions if we've vacated the field, if we're actually not in the game to compete in a virtuous competition of better ideas and economic solutions and market intelligence and entrepreneurial innovation and the applications of science and commerce that have been the bedrock of the reasons that I signed up as I was a military brat too, by the way. I had a dad who said, "Eat your peas and turn the lights off," and all this. So maybe it was that before we were Republicans. But the point is that it's not that we should feel any notional dissent within our party or any amount of apology based on the principles, simply because there has been too much digression or distraction away from the things that have identified the Republican Party as the greatest institution that brought conservation principles into the United States arena as a matter of protecting the land and the resources as a gift for generations, as a matter of building out the infrastructure that could bring us together and give us access to our natural wonders that all of us take our children to see, in this great land of ours, or that come up with a positive view of the future that says we can invest and innovate and outcompete anybody in the world in the technologies that will be differentiated for our children and give us economic competitiveness that is second to none. And Jim dwells in that in terms of cloud computing and big data and how to manage bits and bytes at the nexus of megawatts meet megabytes. And what does it yield? Productivity. So we call it efficiency. I was that efficiency regulator that set the building codes and standards with permission from the White House, and we did these. We did these great things in these two big omnibus energy bills in 2005 and 2007. You think about it, we had 3 decades with no energy bills, and in 24 months we had 2 of them on a bipartisan basis. Some with Republicans owning the Congress, some with Democrats owning the Congress, but always navigating through and saying, how do we come up with the best optimized solutions? And so I guess maybe I don't show up on the Hill anymore because I'm sort of the bad guy. Same guys that voted for the legislation are now saying, oh, they're taking my incandescent light bulb away, and who did that? And that was, these sort of bad Bush guys. We didn't really take anybody's incandescent light bulbs away. We just said the new minimum standard for lighting, for luminaire efficacy, if you want to get technical, for electrons in to lighting out, should be raised at least commensurate with what we're capable of producing for our people. So we still have incandescent light bulbs. They didn't go away. They're just 70% more efficient, and all the trash that was peddled by China for 1 cent on our shores that we were putting in our house to waste our resources are gone. And all the American companies with semiconductor migration out of Albany that have gone into LED lighting, that have changed every Christmas light and ornament you're going to see this year, let alone every car vehicle light, let alone in the next 5 years every optical light that you can't tell. It's not going to be CFL, it's not going to be flickering, it's going to be LED. It came because we set the better standards on American investment in innovation, in semiconductors and LED that have transformed the landscape, and we're looking at a revolution in the economy, and not sort of an aspirational one, gosh, I think it could be this way, wouldn't it be good, wouldn't we feel green, anything else. We're actually looking at having 30% gains in efficiency just because we're all going to change our light. It's now inevitable, backed on our innovation, backed on our science investment. So why would we as conservatives or Republicans say, no, we don't want to harvest investment? We don't want to have the derivatives of the things that the government does and must do, right? Must do. There are things that actually aren't in the marketplace, right? We can't send a man to the moon based on private sector competition. We can't split the atom that way. There are some things that are pre-market. So the big question between us philosophically is how much should the government be overreaching into the market, right? At what level should you say this is the responsible of the things that the marketplace won't handle, nuclear waste management, right? And this is actually what the market can handle. You know, and as a former wind power developer, you know, I was abroad for 12 years, and I was in London when 9/11 happened. And I probably wouldn't have gotten back to Washington had 9/11 not happened, and I had a military family and a public service itch I needed to scratch. And so I came here, and I was a wind power developer. I just sold my wind company. I showed up here, and I said, okay, well, what are you going to do? I'm a wind power developer. And people say, you can't develop wind in America. So what do you mean? It's American technology. I've just been doing it in a place with civil insurrection and non-convertible currency. And what are you talking about? And they say, oh, no, in America, you can only do that when the production tax credit exists. And that's kind of every other third year or something. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. So wait for it to come, because when we get the subsidy, then we develop wind. And I'm saying, you're serious, right? Because I've been doing this in Moroccan dirhams. I mean with paying guardians for anemometers. And so you're telling me I can't do this in America? I said, no. Our policy is such we have an on again, off again. And then somebody said, well, would you advise your party? They're looking for renewable energy guys that advise your party. And I said, well, this is easy. President George W. Bush just passed the renewable portfolio standard in Texas. The renewable portfolio standard in Texas is different from all the other ones. Instead of being very prescriptive and saying, I'm going to give a subsidy for every guy with a widget, he just said, you know, within 15 years, make the portfolio look like that and let the market go. And so in 36 months, Texas tripled the amount of wind power that existed in the United States of America, with California having a 20-year head start. Because of good policy, because of good, intelligent policy of understanding the inputs of what is available from the marketplace. And to some degree, I'd say we have a natural advantage of that. Our party has historically been closer to the marketplace, has been cultivating the entrepreneurship and the ideas, and the idea of creating and expanding markets based on a better mousetrap and a better idea. So we shouldn't shy away from it in the topics for the problems that affect us most on the grandest scale that are coming at us in high speed. We shouldn't be the people that are away from the field. And clearly this congressman, based on who's in your district at least, you probably have Niskayuna, I would guess, in the GE Labs,
sure
and you know, is exposed to the idea that we've got the goods. So why would we be fearful about our capacity to harvest the goods for greater economic gain at a faster speed with intelligent policy, as Jim is hinting at, with simplified and immediate policy solutions that aren't building huge government superstructures of heavy laden things that try to get the private sector and Obamacare for energy, right? We don't need that kind of solution. We need the competing voice that says what is simple and intelligent, that gives a durable and predictable signal to the kind of innovation and entrepreneurship and investment we want to expand and compete and win on the things that we can be proudest of handing off to our kids. And so with that, let me just say how proud I am to share the stage with the people who we've made good policy with in the past and the people who are leading voices in the future, and I look forward to the conversation.
So our time is relatively short, but I do want to have a little back and forth with the panel and then have some of the voices of the audience. And Congressman, you've heard Jim and Andy, and you are here in Washington on the Hill, and with that capacity to influence the direction of policy. Reactions to what you've heard, where do you see potential opportunities to both advance the Republican leadership on these issues, but also find that sweet spot on a bipartisan basis?
Well, I'm very encouraged, first of all, with the passion, with the depth of knowledge, and really for the precision of the conceptual framework that's been laid out here. No doubt, hearkening to detail when it comes to policy prescription. 2 points I would make that really I think are important for America, and I think important for our party because we're part of America. And we, as was pointed out, I'm proud of our heritage, Teddy Roosevelt, and the things that he did for our country. And the first of which is just science. It's just accepting science and not pushing back on science. It doesn't mean that it's infallible because we're always learning, but I'm just underwhelmed at times at some of the roadblocks that we put up against this. Look, I mean, let's face the facts that now look, climate's been changing since time out of memory. That is true, but we're exacerbating it with human actions. So let's just face that. And you know, going back to Plato, you know, I mean, you can say, well, you know, you just take a look at a microcosm and take a look at some of the interactions that are happening in a microcosm and say, well, if it's happening there, why would it not be happening to the entire space that we have? And of course, we know it is. So that'd be the first thing. It's just, and that's part of the reason why I'm bringing forward the resolution. The bill is just to gain some consensus on that and to get a recognition of that. Then the question becomes, what do we do about it? And we think we've got some good market-oriented approaches that will make a difference. I heard Senator mention, I heard both these distinguished gentlemen mention the impact of research and sort of what was basically said, a public good. You know, the role of what the government can play that can facilitate markets. And you know, this is a space that, indeed, I am proud of what Upstate New York is doing on that score, Niskayuna and the College of Nanoscale and other places, and you know, believe that this will be the country that perfects renewable energy and makes it competitive and really democratizing it. It's not going to be in China. It's not going to be in Germany. And as much as we lament where we are at the current moment, I think that that we will be able to do that. And I think that, for example, the most state-of-the-art semiconductor in the world now is manufactured in upstate New York. It's not in Singapore, it's not in Germany, it's actually in upstate New York. And it wasn't a welfare, we didn't, you know, it wasn't given to us. We earned it. We earned it. Now it's about 20 years in the making in terms of investments that were made in both public and private space that got us to that point. But, you know, recognizing that if we could get up that mountain, we can absolutely get up this mountain. And so, you know, that's where I'd like to see our party go, is just those 2 points there, and then be involved in the conversation, which really gets to the larger point of market and what regulatory schemes and how do we optimize them so that we essentially minimize the friction, if you will, as we make this transition. That's what I take away from this. And other than that, I really want to continue to get to know these guys because I think they can be very helpful.
So Jim, you mentioned the Princess phone. I do remember. I think I had a pink one.
Mine was blue.
We've heard we've heard comments about research and development. We've heard comments about performance standards in the context of renewable portfolio standards. But let's go to the electric utility context. And after all, that is where the greenhouse gas emission focus often is placed. And looking there, tremendous opportunity for innovation. Indeed, your firm is involved in some innovation relevant to that. Is there a regulatory role there to spawn that innovation in the way that we saw with telecom, say, 30 years ago? And by regulatory, I don't necessarily mean some more, but perhaps pivoting or redesign. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so our electricity infrastructure is predicated on a model that was necessary and quite successful 100 years ago. Just like getting cable TV, you needed to give a local monopoly for the first player to achieve the economy of scale of just hooking everybody up to that coaxial cable, okay? And it's just like a patent. You give somebody a patent, you know, and they get to run with it for a while, but then it becomes, people can then innovate off it after a period of time, or a copyright. We have this great philosophy. We'll correctly, as government, create the incentive to draw forward the infrastructure, but then only for long enough for it to be established, and then let people innovate like crazy. We somehow didn't do that when it came to power, okay? And so the original monopolists are hanging on to their original monopoly, when what we really need to do is narrow it down. We still actually need a regulated monopoly structure for the wires, right? Because you're not going to run two sets of electricity wires. I mean, that would be kind of dumb. But what you can liberalize is everything else, okay? From generation all the way up to the house. In fact, by the way, you don't need a single meter. You know, we have this idea that you need, you know, that one utility should install all the meters across. A meter is just a communication device for accurate reporting of consumption. There's lots of different ways you can do that as long as you have a standard. So you need government to set the standard like the FCC does for, you know, for bandwidth. You need the same thing on accurate reporting, but let innovation happen right up to the point where the wire hits the house, right? Let innovation happen. And then inside the house, let innovation happen. And in the generation, let innovation happen. So there's lots of places innovation can happen. But right now at the federal level and at the state level, we're still stuck with this old model. Now, as a result, technologies are hard to get in. It's happening, though. It's just big, whether it's the evolution in thermostats and interconnected home, distribution automation. It's happening, but it's happening at a glacial pace, okay? And it doesn't have to. It just doesn't have to. One dirty little secret of power, and this tells you the politics of power, is the sector is not allowed to spend more than the rate of inflation. Let me unpack that for you. I can tell you exactly how much the utility sector will spend this year. It's about $90 billion on new investment, because that is a little bit less than 3%. And that means that when they go to the regulator to get a rate, they're not causing an increase in the rate. So as long as you're spending at the rate of inflation, your rate's not increasing. Okay, but if I applied that standard to telecom, right, we'd still be, we'd still be using dial phones. Good to see you, Congressman.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody, I got to go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
If the sector was allowed to double its capital spend, it could probably quadruple its efficiency and provide higher quality services to everybody. But there's a political constraint because everyone's afraid of raising rates because they can't do the math of doubling the spend to reduce the rate. Okay, and that's because of the architecture we've created for ourselves. However, the beauty of it is we've solved that problem in aviation, in telecom, in the delivery of milk to the grocery store, and now it's coming to your home. I mean, so we've solved it in every other major consumable. We just haven't fully resolved for it in electricity. And if we did, everything we talk about when it comes to smart grid, it would just happen faster, and it would be cooler, and it would be cheaper.
So Andy, one final word, and then I'm going to open it up for some questions or comments. Comments on what you've heard.
Let me tack on to what Jim has said just about electricity. We talk a lot more about electricity than fuels in this country right now because we're bathed in fuels. We have so much fuels, we're leaking fuels at an incredible rate in this country, which is not, that we would have been dealt this hand instead of $147 oil and a crazy Putin and Ahmadinejad and Chavez, and that we would be arguing in the Bush administration, how quickly can we export this to the world to share and influence and leverage and get our geopolitical house in order. That would be a great hand to deal with. That they at the current White House really can't figure out whether, after 40 years of lessons about how we mismanage scarcity, how we might intelligently turn that and manage abundance and begin to use it for our geopolitical leverage and position in the world and our economic advantage is unbelievable to me. But it leaves this orphaned issue of electricity, since we're bathing in fuel and what to do about it, out there. And as Jim would suggest, because he's a primary actor in it, the market has far surpassed the government, the regulators, the policymakers' capacity to keep up with it because of how much technology is out there and available that is changing the paradigm in the way we trade and exchange and use electrons in our homes, in our businesses, in our factories, et cetera. And if you're going to look at it with an environmental impact point of view, and there's only one party talking about it robustly, and their solutions are what we react to. And their solutions are, we only have a hammer, so everything's a nail. So let's regulate out the existence of coal and pretend for a moment that the emissions from coal go away everywhere, and that things that we're generating at 42% somewhere in outside of San Francisco aren't making it into generation at 30% efficient generators in Shanghai instead. To pretend that we don't live in a globally fungible world and that this coal isn't moving around is obviously a fallacy. So if you want to deal with the impact of existing carbon-based fuels, you're going to need to deal with the science, research, development, and new applied solutions for coal. And if you don't, even though I am a long investor on renewable energies and a long supporter of them, you will not begin to arrest the problems that you are trying to solve. And so the Republican Party, the conservatives, ought to weigh into that discussion and say, let's not it's going away, because it's not going away. What we've got to do is solve the end of the waste stream for coal, just like we have to solve, detoxify, apply new technologies to the end of the waste stream for nuclear. In an atomic power, the country that split the atom, arguably the greatest achievement other than walking on the moon for humanity, let alone the American century, we have a binary choice to make right now. Will the country that opened Pandora's box and split the atom, and Eisenhower, who offered atoms for peace to the world, will we again be the ones who atrophy our workforce, retire reactors, vacate the field, begin eroding the entire basis of the largest source of emission-free generation that we have and have brought to mankind, and all the other proliferating security risks that go along with that? Are we willing to read our manuals in Chinese in the next 10 years? Or are we going to resurrect this key source of energy? And we're not having that discussion because we're talking about what the efficiency rate of solar panels will be if you can get a green badge of courage in Vermont for applying most of them where they don't belong, where they actually belong in the desert Southwest, right? So we need to be initiating a discussion about rational resource utilization across the diversity of resources that we are going to live with in the next century, including carbon-based resources, including existing solutions for non-emitting resources, and we need to robustly weigh in on those things to assure that there is balance in the discussion about the ultimate outcome of the grid we seek, the attributes of the power sources we seek, and including the applied technology that's going to change and lower the amount of energy we have to use because of the stuff that Jim is doing at C3.
Let me describe two quick anecdotes. One relates to the grid and this idea of market-driven improvement. With the advance of computing technology, with hardware that can give you lots of data, we're now headed toward an information-driven electricity system, which is really, really exciting. But I want to put that in very tangible terms. If you can harness the data, if you can apply the hardware, if you can get through the approvals, okay, the benefit in, I told you, in efficiency, maybe 20, 30%, but in dollars, for your typical 5 million meter utility, so we have many of them in America, right, for about 5 million meters, you're talking about annual savings of more than $1 billion. Okay, that's not a small amount of money. It's a little better than zero, and then that gets reinvested, right? That's a capital available for reinvestment and acceleration into this next generation of technologies that Andy describes. So that's one anecdote, and that's just sitting there. Now, if I went to any other sector and said, there's $1 billion annual opportunity, okay, let's say I'm wrong, it's half that. The board of directors and shareholders would be up at arms that you failed to go after it, and if you didn't, somebody else would be acquiring you right away to go get it. Okay, that's not what's happening in the structure of electricity right now. It's really quite remarkable. On the other side of the equation, when I was in the utility, when I was working in a big utility, Constellation Energy, I actually commissioned a study. Because I said, in America, if I had to, I want all the energy sources, but which two are the most synergistic in terms of reliability support with emissions profile, the best emissions profile with the best reliability support? If I had to put two together, I can only pick two. It could be coal and gas, it could be gas and nuclear, it could be renewable and nuclear, and I said, I'm not going to predict the outcome. Tell me what the outcome is. In 8 of 9 regions of America, the best combination is nuclear and renewable energy. But in the policy world, you cannot get the renewable energy people in the same room with the nuclear people. And yet, in 8 of 9 regions in America, that is the economically and environmentally optimal combination. And in the other region, actually, it's coal before the gas prices came down, but it's a different combination. It's coal with nuclear, okay? But so if you just looked at it objectively and just said, let's let the market set up and let that happen, we'd probably, we'd be racing ahead on both to everybody's pleasure. But everyone wants to divide and conquer and have their own winning outcome.
So we have a little bit of time. So let me turn to those of you in the audience, and I'm going to repeat the question after you state it for the purposes of the recording. So any questions? If you actually have a comment, I'd ask you to come up to the mic so that we can also hear that and record that. But any questions? Yes?
So do you think government actually can regulate a monopoly, as in the amount of innovation that's been presented to the patent office? They can actually reject those applications and tell, say, that's not an innovation, and actually reduce that monopoly innovations to actually control the markets. Do you think the patent office has a lot of control on the innovation policy side?
So the question is, does the patent office have a lot of control over the direction of innovation, essentially is the question.
You, me?
You start.
Okay. Well, you know, it's I won't. You sound like you have a very specific case that inspires a question in a very technical way, perhaps. But so let me come from the opposite end of it and say, I think it is one of the greatest, least known things of our Constitution that we contemplated a patent office and intellectual property rights and the idea that a person's ideas could be protected as property so that it had value. And that is in most ways what made us the greatest meritocracy in the history of humanity, that people of all races and religions from all parts of the world could come together and say a better idea has value. Now, I worry a great deal that the bureaucratization of our patent office and intellectual property rights has slowed that, so that the United States and American nationals, in fact, are increasingly a minority to other nationalities filing patents in the United States because we can't avail it easily. Entrepreneurs can't access it in the way that Edison did without like everything else in this town, an army of lawyers and accountants and everybody else, and not only for the filing, not only for the commencement of a new business and a better idea and a better mousetrap, but for the protection of yourself, because if you're missing one widget on one piece of page, you're opening yourself to lawsuits and trolling and whole jurisdictions that specialize in this. So unfortunately, without any disrespect to my friends the lawyers, they have taken over disproportionately their impact on the protection of intellectual property rights, which ought to be more simplified to let American entrepreneurs and innovators succeed faster. I think that is what our visionary founders themselves, many of them inventors, had in mind when they said, let's protect ideas and be a magnet for the world's best and ensure that humanity's best can be applied economically for the advance of the nation. I think we have undermined that to some extent, and it's due for some reform.
So I can take one more question. I wish we had time for more, but we have to vacate the room in a little bit. So any other comment or question? Yeah, Glenn.
So Jim and Andy and Lynn, thank you. Terrific as always. So you both talked about the need to create a simpler policy framework for the power sector, and Andy, you talked about what happens in Texas. If you could spend time up on the Hill, what would you recommend happen in the next Congress at the federal level to simplify the power sector regulatory structure to get some of the outcomes you're talking about?
Okay, so on the power sector side, the essential task for Congress, which is currently an impossible one, but that's been true of other times, is Congress has to decide how much greenhouse gas emissions. That's it. Okay, so if Congress gets together and just says this amount by this date from power, okay, everything else falls into place. All these other battles, by the way, Keystone, even going beyond power a little bit, they're all proxy battles over how far, how fast on carbon. Okay, it's all a proxy battle, and it's a really expensive one. We are paying more per ton of carbon reduced with the wind and solar subsidies than we would if Congress just decided how far, how fast on carbon. We are paying more per ton. It's cash for clunkers, $14,000 a ton of carbon reduced. Okay, I mean that's nuts, and yet that's national policy, right? CAFE, the wind subsidy plus the RPSs is $90 a ton of carbon reduced, but bipartisan policy. Okay, so all these little surrogate policies are costing us a lot more and impeding the alacrity of innovation. Right? When a simple determination, just tell me what the number is. How much do I want it to be and at what price? So figure out what you're willing to spend. That's only Congress can do that, not EPA. Then all of a sudden, we know the policies that get you there fast. And that debate then is over, because Congress will immediately go to the policy that's the most efficient. And I won't say which one it is. There's several ways to do it. And it almost doesn't matter, because as soon as we agree how far, how fast, and at what price, the best policy will emerge.
Andy, one final observation, then we'll wrap up.
So, I talk about sort of the attributes of that, and like the senator, like the congressman, like Jim, I'm a pragmatist. What is it that you can do to set the best bar to give the marketplace the most robust signals that are predictable, durable, have longevity, and allow our capitalists to invest in the future that we want? Because there is no problem we are asserting or talking about or implying in this room that is a biennial election cycle problem, or a quadrennial 4-year presidential election cycle problem, or for that matter, a 10-year corporate balance sheet problem. We are talking about decadal problems, century problems. We're talking about the need to apply solutions that are durable for a century, as our party was known for when Teddy Roosevelt was architecting them, or when Dwight Eisenhower was thinking of infrastructure that would be around for 200 years. And we need that kind of thinking. And to do that, we've got to embed the attributes that we want. And we are overdue for comprehensive tax reform. And we will have, because it is inevitable, and even if it's late, comprehensive tax reform. And the only question is, how effective will it be for the nation in stimulating the economic activity that is inexorable? And how many positive attributes will it yield for the externalities that the market itself won't perform unless you enable it to? And as a Republican, I would say, how do we begin to shift the burden of taxation away from things we want more of, like payroll and income and supply-side economics that have done us so well in the past to stimulate and catalyze growth, instead of this anemic thing that we call growth, and people are beating their chest around town, acting like this is a robust economy. It is not. Most Americans can feel that. And so change this tax paradigm into the ones that we know that works, and make the revenue collections against the things we want less of, like environmental degradation or national insecurity. And I think we can do that with intelligent heads and good policymakers in the course of the discussion that needs to happen on comprehensive tax reform. And I look forward to seeing it evolve.
Well, let me pick up on that. Our nation's investment in the environment, historically, is directly proportionate to the freedom of economic growth. A strong and growing economy is a necessary condition of the next piece of investment in environment and conservation. This whole hand-in-hand thing is not right. It's a growing economy gives us more national wealth, and we actually do invest that in greater environmental protection and conservation. And that, so I actually think tax reform could be one of the biggest contributors to our future environmental progress than any of the straight up environmental policies. But nobody ever wants to look at it at a macro level.
So let us give a final round of applause. Really great discussion. And thank you again to the sponsors, and thank you very much for your participation.